Welcome to the Honeyed Leaf, where every cup of tea comes with a story. I'm so glad you're here. If you enjoy gentle mysteries that help you sleep, please subscribe so you never miss a visit to Willowbrook. Tonight, we're returning to the peaceful village, where Clara Whitmore is about to find herself drawn into another gentle mystery. Before we begin, find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you'd like, and let yourself relax. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just let the story carry you peacefully towards sleep. Now, let's visit Willowbrook together. Chapter 1. An unexpected delivery. April brought warm sunshine and blooming apple trees to Willowbrook. Clara stood at the window of the Honeyed Leaf, watching petals drift past on a gentle breeze. Spring had fully arrived, and the village seemed to wake up after winter's long sleep. The shop was busy this morning with customers seeking her new spring blend, green tea with jasmine flowers and a hint of mint, light and refreshing, perfect for the warming days. Mrs. Pembrook arrived at her usual time, settling into her favourite spot with a contented sigh. "Lovely weather we're having," she announced. "Perfect for spring cleaning. I've been going through old boxes in my attic." Clara brought over the Earl Grey and biscuits. "Finding anything interesting?" "Oh, all sorts of things. Old photographs, letters, papers from my parents and grandparents. I really should organise it all properly, but it's rather overwhelming." Mrs. Pembrook paused. "Actually, I found something rather odd, a letter addressed to someone in this building." Clara felt that familiar flutter of curiosity. "This building? The Honeyed Leaf?" "Well, the building, yes, but it's addressed to someone named James Winters, care of this address. The letter is dated 1943. I have no idea who James Winters was, or why he'd received mail here." "May I see it?" Clara asked. Mrs. Pembrook pulled an envelope from her handbag. It was yellowed with age, the handwriting faded but still legible. The address read, "Mr. James Winters, care of the Willow Tea Room, High Street, Willowbrook." "The Willow Tea Room," Clara said softly. "That must be what this shop was called before. I didn't know it had been a tea room historically." "Oh yes, for decades," Mrs. Pembrook said. "It was quite popular during the war years, a place for people to gather, have a cup of tea, hear the news. My mother used to go there regularly. It closed in the late 1950s, I believe. The building sat empty for years before you reopened it." Clara turned the envelope over carefully. It had never been opened. The seal was still intact. "It was never delivered," she murmured. "How did it end up in your attic?" "That's the puzzle. I found it in a box of my mother's things, papers, recipes, old ration books from the war, but I have no idea why she'd have someone else's letter, unless she was somehow involved in its delivery, or knew the intended recipient." "Should we open it?" Mrs. Pembrook asked. "After all this time?" Clara considered. The letter was over 80 years old. Whoever had sent it and whoever was meant to receive it were likely long gone. But still, it felt like an intrusion to open someone else's mail. "Let me ask Beatrice," Clara decided. "She might know about James Winters, or about the Willow Tea Room's history. Perhaps we can find out more about the people involved before we decide whether to open it." Mrs. Pembrook agreed this was sensible. She left the letter with Clara, who propped it carefully on the shelf behind her counter. Throughout the morning, Clara found her gaze drawn to that yellowed envelope. Someone had written a letter in 1943, during wartime, and addressed it here, to this very building. But it had never reached its recipient. What had happened? Why had the letter gone astray? And what news or thoughts did it contain? That afternoon, during a quiet spell, Clara walked to the library. Beatrice was at the circulation desk, cataloguing new books. She looked up with a welcoming smile. "Clara, lovely to see you. What brings you by?" Clara explained about the letter and showed Beatrice the envelope. Beatrice's eyes lit up with interest. "James Winters. Now that's a name I haven't encountered in a while. Let me check our local history files." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a folder and an old photograph. James Winters owned the Willow Tea Room from 1935 until 1956. He lived in the flat above the shop. "Your flat?" Clara looked at the photograph. It showed the front of her building, probably taken in the 1940s. The sign above the door read, "The Willow Tea Room," in elegant lettering. A man stood in the doorway, perhaps in his 30s, with a friendly face and an apron. "Is this James Winters?" "I believe so. He was well liked in the village from what I've read in old newspapers and records. Never married, devoted to his tea room. He kept it open throughout the war, even during rationing. People said it was a bright spot during dark times." "What happened to him?" Clara asked. "He closed the tea room in 1956 due to ill health and moved away. To live with family, I think. He died a few years later." Beatrice studied the envelope. "This letter is from 1943, right in the middle of the war. I wonder why it was never delivered to him." "That's what we're trying to understand," Clara said. "Mrs. Pembrook found it among her mother's papers. Her mother was a regular customer at the Willow Tea Room during the war." "Ah," Beatrice said thoughtfully. "Perhaps Mrs. Pembrook's mother was meant to deliver it, but never got the chance. Or perhaps she was holding it for safekeeping. Postal service was disrupted during the war, you know. Letters sometimes went to neighbours for collection if the recipient was out." "That would make sense," Clara agreed. "So the question is, do we open it? To see what it says and perhaps understand why it never reached James?" Beatrice considered carefully. "I think we should, not out of nosiness, but to complete the story. This letter has been waiting 80 years to be read. Whoever sent it wanted James to know something. Even if James never knew, perhaps we can honour that intention by understanding it." Clara felt the same way. They returned to the honeyed leaf, where Beatrice carefully opened the envelope using a letter opener. She removed the pages inside with gentle hands. There were 2 sheets, covered in neat handwriting. The letter was dated April 10th, 1943. Clara and Beatrice read it together. "My dear James," the letter began. "I hope this finds you well and that the tea room continues to thrive despite the difficulties. I think of you often and remember with fondness our conversations over tea. You always had such kindness and wisdom to offer. I am writing to let you know that I am well and settled in my new posting. I cannot say where, of course, but I am safe and the work is important. I think of Willowbrook often, especially on quiet evenings. The village seems so far away now, though it has been less than a year since I left. I wonder if the apple trees are blooming yet. Are the swallows returning to nest in the church eaves? Does Mrs. Marsh still come in for her afternoon tea at 3 o'clock exactly? These small things seem so precious from a distance. I wanted to write to thank you. You may not remember, but during those months when I was so unhappy and uncertain, your tea room was a refuge. You listened without judgment, offered quiet support, and helped me see that there were possibilities beyond what I had imagined for myself. You gave me courage, James, though you probably didn't know it. When I decided to join the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, it was partly because of our conversations. You said once that sometimes we must step beyond our fears to discover who we truly are. I took that to heart. I am discovering who I am, James, and I am grateful for it, even though it is difficult, and I am often tired and occasionally frightened. But I am also useful, capable, and free in a way I never was before. I am not simply someone's daughter or sister. I am myself, doing work that matters. I hope the war ends soon and we can all return to normal life, though I wonder what normal will mean after all this. I suspect I cannot go back to what I was before. I have changed too much, but that is a worry for another day. For now, I wanted you to know that you made a difference in my life. Your kindness mattered. Your tea room mattered. The space you created for people to rest and talk and simply be themselves, that mattered more than you may ever know. Thank you, dear friend. I hope to see you again when this is all over. Until then, I remain, with great affection and gratitude, Dorothy Fletcher. Clara and Beatrice looked at each other, both moved by the letter. Dorothy Fletcher, Beatrice said softly. That was old Tom Fletcher's aunt. I remember her vaguely from village stories. She served in the WWII during the war, never married, had quite an independent life afterwards. She died in the early 2000s, I believe. She wanted to thank James, Clara said, to tell him how much his kindness had meant. but the letter never reached him. And now we know what it said, Beatrice replied. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it's not about the letter reaching James all those years ago, but about us understanding now what happened here, in this building. The Willow Tea Room was more than just a place to drink tea. It was a refuge, a place where people found support and courage. Clara looked around her shop. The honeyed leaf was her own version of what James had created, a space for gathering, for conversation, for quiet support. She was continuing something that had begun long before her. I want to know more about James Winters, Clara said, and about Dorothy Fletcher. I want to understand their story fully. Then let's research, Beatrice said with a smile. Let's find out everything we can. Chapter 2. Discovering the Willow Tea Room. Over the next few days, Clara and Beatrice delved into the history of the Willow Tea Room and its owner. Beatrice searched through library archives, old newspapers and village records. Clara talked to older residents, including old Tom Fletcher, Dorothy's nephew. A picture gradually emerged of James Winters and his tea room. James had inherited the building from an aunt in 1935. He'd been a shy, thoughtful man in his late 20s, uncertain what to do with his life. He'd decided to open a tea room, partly because he loved tea, but mostly because he'd wanted to create a welcoming space in the village. The Willow Tea Room had opened quietly and gradually become a fixture of village life. James served good tea, simple food, and most importantly, created an atmosphere of acceptance and peace. People came not just for refreshment, but for the company and the kindness James offered. During the war years, the tea room became especially important. With so many men away fighting and so much uncertainty and fear, the Willow Tea Room was a place of constancy and comfort. James kept it open despite rationing, despite difficulties obtaining supplies, despite his own worries about the war. Old Tom Fletcher remembered his Aunt Dorothy talking about the tea room. She used to say James Winters saved her life, Tom told Clara one afternoon at the Honeyed Leaf. Not literally, you understand, but in spirit. She'd been engaged to a local fellow before the war, but she was unhappy about it, felt trapped. Her family was pushing the marriage, saying it was her duty, her proper place. But Dorothy had dreams of doing something more. When the war started and they needed women to volunteer for service, she wanted to join up. But her family was dead against it. Said it wasn't proper, wasn't safe, wasn't what women should do. She used to go to the Willow Tea Room and talk to James about it. He'd listen for hours, never judging, just helping her think through what she really wanted. Eventually, she found the courage to break off her engagement and join the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Her family was scandalised, but Dorothy said it was the best decision she ever made. She served as a radio operator throughout the war. After the war, she never married, became a teacher instead. Lived on her own terms. She always credited James Winters with helping her see that was possible. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. That's what her letter was about. She was thanking him for giving her courage. But the letter never reached him. Why not? I don't know, Tom said. Perhaps it simply got lost in the post. Mail was unreliable during the war. Or perhaps Dorothy sent it to someone to deliver and it never happened. We'll probably never know for certain. But Clara wanted to try to find out. She talked to Mrs. Pembrook again. Your mother, did she know Dorothy Fletcher? Oh yes, they were friends. Both regulars at the Willow Tea Room. Mrs. Pembrook thought back. Mother used to talk about how brave Dorothy was, joining up like that. It inspired other women in the village, you know. Showed them there were other paths besides marriage. Why would your mother have had Dorothy's letter? Clara asked gently. I've been thinking about that, Mrs. Pembrook said. Mother was quite active in village affairs. She helped organise things, delivered messages, that sort of thing. Perhaps Dorothy gave her the letter to deliver to James, and for some reason Mother never did. Perhaps she forgot in the chaos of the war years, or perhaps something prevented her. She might have tucked it away, meaning to give it to James later, and then simply forgot about it. She did have a lot on her mind during those years. My father was away fighting. She had 4 children to care for. She was working as well. Things got forgotten. It was a reasonable explanation, an undelivered letter, meant well but lost in the chaos of wartime life. It happened. but Clara found herself wishing there was more to know. Had James ever realised Dorothy was grateful to him? Had he known the difference he'd made in her life? Beatrice found more information about James's later years. He'd developed heart problems in the mid-1950s and had closed the tea room. He'd moved to live with a cousin in Sussex and had died there in 1959, only 53 years old. He'd never married, had devoted his life to his tea room and his community. "He sounds like a gentle soul," Beatrice said. "The kind of person who made the world better in quiet ways." "Like Dorothy," Clara added. "She spent 30 years as a teacher, shaping young lives. Both of them made a difference, even though they're largely forgotten now. But we're remembering them," Beatrice pointed out. "That's something." Clara looked at Dorothy's letter, now carefully preserved in an archival sleeve. "I wish there was a way to honour them both, to acknowledge what the Willow Tea Room meant, what James created here." An idea began to form. What if we created a small memorial, here in the shop? Something that tells the story of James and the Willow Tea Room, and Dorothy and her courage. Beatrice's face lit up. A historical display, with photographs, Dorothy's letter, information about the tea room during the war. It would be perfect. They began planning immediately. Chapter 3. Creating the Memorial. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara and Beatrice worked to create a memorial display for the Willow Tea Room. Beatrice gathered photographs, newspaper clippings, and records from the library archives. Clara talked to more villagers who remembered James and Dorothy, collecting stories and memories. Old Tom Fletcher provided photographs of his Aunt Dorothy in her WWII uniform. Mrs. Pembrook found pictures of her mother at the Willow Tea Room during the war years. Others contributed ration books, old menus, wartime memorabilia. The village was eager to help preserve this piece of their history. Clara decided to create the display on the wall near the window, where people could see it while having their tea. She found an old photograph of James Winters standing in front of the Willow Tea Room and had it beautifully framed. Next to it, she placed Dorothy's letter in its protective sleeve, with a card explaining its history. Around these centerpieces, she arranged other photographs and items. Images of the tea room during the war, pictures of Dorothy in uniform, newspaper clippings about village life during the 1940s, a copy of a Willow Tea Room menu from 1943, showing the limited offerings available during rationing. But Clara wanted more than just a historical display. She wanted to capture the spirit of what James had created, the sense of refuge and welcome, the importance of kindness and listening. She wrote a description to accompany the display, explaining what the Willow Tea Room had meant to Willowbrook. In this building, from 1935 to 1956, James Winters ran the Willow Tea Room. It was more than a place to drink tea. It was a refuge during difficult times, a place where people could speak freely, be heard without judgment, and find support during their struggles. During World War II, when so much was uncertain and frightening, the Willow Tea Room remained a constant source of comfort. James Winters listened to countless worries, offered quiet wisdom, and helped many people, including Dorothy Fletcher, find the courage to choose their own paths. His kindness rippled outward, touching lives in ways he may never have known. This letter, written by Dorothy in 1943 but never delivered, expresses her gratitude for that kindness. Though James never received these words, we share them now as a reminder that small acts of care matter deeply. That creating space for others to be themselves is profound work. The honeyed leaf continues in that tradition, striving to offer the same welcome and refuge that James provided. We honour his memory and Dorothy's courage by maintaining this as a place of community, kindness, and acceptance. The display was unveiled on a Saturday afternoon in late April. Clara had invited everyone who'd contributed to its creation, along with anyone interested in village history. The honeyed leaf was packed. Old Tom Fletcher stood before the photograph of his Aunt Dorothy, tears in his eyes. "I wish she could see this," he said quietly. "She'd be so pleased to be remembered." Mrs. Pembrook examined the display with her daughter and grandchildren, explaining who everyone was, what the war had been like. "This is your history," she told them. "These are the people who shaped our village. who made it what it is. Several older villagers shared their own memories of the Willow Tea Room, how they'd gathered there for news during the war, how James had somehow managed to keep serving tea even when supplies were scarce, how he'd never turned anyone away, even if they couldn't pay, how the tea room had been a lifeline during dark times. He was a kind man, one elderly woman said. Never married, but he cared for all of us. He knew everyone's troubles and never gossiped, never judged. You could tell him anything and know it was safe. Another woman added, when my husband was reported missing in action, I didn't know what to do, where to go. I ended up at the Willow Tea Room and James just sat with me. Didn't try to tell me it would be all right or offer false comfort. Just made me tea and sat there, keeping me company in the worst moment of my life. That mattered more than words could have. Stories poured out, memories long held privately, now shared publicly. The Willow Tea Room had been woven into so many lives. James Winters had touched so many people with his quiet kindness. And Dorothy Fletcher, in following her own path, had inspired others to do the same. As the afternoon wore on, Clara served tea and listened to the stories. She felt a deep connection to James, to what he'd created in this very building. She understood now that she wasn't just running a tea shop, she was continuing a legacy, maintaining a tradition of welcome and refuge that stretched back decades. After most guests had left, old Tom Fletcher approached Clara. Thank you for this, he said, for remembering Aunt Dorothy and James Winters, for making sure their story isn't lost. It's important, Clara said simply. They deserve to be remembered. Tom hesitated, then said, I have something you might want to see. Letters Aunt Dorothy wrote to my mother during the war. She mentioned James and the Willow Tea Room in several of them. Would you like to read them? Perhaps you could add excerpts to your display. I would love that, Clara said warmly. Thank you, Tom. Over the following days, Clara read through Dorothy's wartime letters. They painted a vivid picture of a young woman discovering herself, finding courage, building a life beyond what had been expected of her. And throughout, she mentioned the Willow Tea Room and James Winters with affection and gratitude. In one letter from 1944, Dorothy wrote, I often think of those afternoons at the Willow Tea Room, talking with James about my dreams and fears. He never told me what to do, but he helped me see that I had choices, that I could choose my own path. That seems such a simple thing, but for a woman in our world, it's revolutionary. James understood that. He created a space where women could imagine different futures for themselves. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to choose mine. Clara added this quote to the display, along with excerpts from other letters. The memorial grew richer, more complete. It told a story not just of two individuals, but of a moment in history when people were forced to make difficult choices, and a tea room that helped them find the strength to do so. Chapter 4. Unexpected Connections. A month after the memorial was unveiled, Clara received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Sarah Winters, living in Sussex. She'd heard about the display through a friend who'd visited Willowbrook and seen photographs online. James Winters was my great-uncle, Sarah wrote. I never knew him well. He died when I was very young, but my grandmother, his cousin, used to tell stories about him and his tea room. She said he was the kindest person she'd ever known. I was moved to learn that people in Willowbrook still remember him and have honoured his memory. Might I visit to see the display? Clara immediately wrote back, inviting Sarah to visit any time. 2 weeks later, Sarah arrived at the Honeyed Leaf. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She studied the memorial display for a long time, tears streaming down her face. This is wonderful, she finally said. To see Uncle James remembered like this, to read Dorothy's letter. My grandmother always said he had such a good heart, but never really knew how much he mattered to people. He mattered greatly, Clara assured her. The stories people have shared, the memories they have, they're all about his kindness and the refuge he created. Sarah reached into her bag. I brought something I thought you might like to see. Uncle James's journal from the war years. My grandmother kept it after he died. I've never shown it to anyone, but I think perhaps it belongs here, with his story. Clara accepted the journal carefully. It was similar to Dorothy's letter, a simple notebook filled with handwriting. She opened it to a random page, dated June 1943. "Another difficult day," James had written. "News from the front is grim. Mrs. Patterson learned her son was killed in North Africa. No words can comfort such loss, but I made her tea and sat with her. Sometimes presence is all we can offer." Clara read more entries. James wrote about the challenges of running the tea room during wartime, the difficulty of obtaining supplies, of making rations stretch, of maintaining hope when everything seemed dark. But he also wrote about why he kept going. "I believe this space matters," one entry read. "In times of crisis, we need places where we can simply be human, where we can speak our fears, share our grief, admit our doubts. The tea room is such a place. It's my small contribution to helping people endure this terrible war." Another entry caught Clara's attention. It was dated April 1943. "Dorothy Fletcher came in today to say goodbye. She's joining the WWII and shipping out next week. She thanked me for our conversations, said I'd helped her find courage. I'm not sure I did anything special, just listened and asked questions, but I'm glad if it helped. I'll worry about her, of course, but I admire her courage. So many women are discovering their strength during this war, taking on roles they never imagined for themselves. When this is over, I suspect the world will be different. I hope it will be better." Clara looked up at Sarah, her vision blurred with tears. He did know. He understood what he'd done for Dorothy, even if he never received her letter. "Yes," Sarah said softly. He knew he made a difference, even if he didn't know all the details. That's something. "Would you consider donating this journal to the memorial?" Clara asked. "I treasure it, protect it, make sure it's part of telling James's story." Sarah nodded. "I think Uncle James would like that. He wasn't the sort to seek recognition, but he'd be pleased to know his work is remembered and valued." The journal was added to the display, carefully preserved and annotated. More visitors came to see the expanding memorial. School groups learned about wartime Willowbrook. Researchers interested in women's war service came to read Dorothy's letters. The memorial became a destination, bringing people to the shop and to the village. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about kindness, about creating spaces of refuge, about the importance of listening and supporting each other. Clara found herself having deep discussions with customers about these themes. People shared their own stories of places that had been refuges for them, of people who'd helped them through difficult times. The honeyed leaf became even more of a community gathering place, continuing James's legacy in an active, living way. Chapter 5. Continuing the legacy. As summer arrived in Willowbrook, Clara reflected on everything the lost letter had set in motion. Finding Dorothy's undelivered thank you had led to uncovering James Winters's story, creating the memorial, connecting with his family, and ultimately deepening the sense of community at the honeyed leaf. One warm June evening, Clara hosted a special event. She'd invited everyone who'd been part of discovering and preserving the Willow Tea Room story. Old Tom Fletcher, Mrs. Pembrook, Sarah Winters, Beatrice, and many others gathered in the shop. Clara had prepared a special tea blend for the occasion. She'd researched teas available during the war years and created something similar to what James might have served. Simple black tea with a hint of bergamot, the kind of straightforward, comforting blend that would have been possible even with rationing. She called it the Willow Blend in James's honour, in E. As people gathered and talked, sharing memories and stories, Clara felt a profound sense of connection. Not just to the people in the room, but to James and Dorothy, to all the people who'd gathered in this building over the decades, seeking comfort and community. The legacy continued, passed forward from generation to generation. Old Tom Fletcher stood to say a few words. "My Aunt Dorothy used to say that the measure of a life well lived wasn't fame or fortune, but the positive impact you had on others. She believed that, and she learned it partly from James Winters. Both of them lived meaningful lives by that measure. They helped people, created space for others to grow, offered kindness without seeking recognition. And now, decades later, we're still benefiting from their example." Clara has continued what James started. This shop is once again a refuge, a place of welcome and support. That's a beautiful thing. Sarah Winters added her thoughts. I wish I'd known my great-uncle James better, but through this process, through reading his journal and hearing these stories, I feel I've come to know him, and I'm proud to be related to someone who lived with such kindness and purpose. Thank you all for preserving his memory and for showing me what his life meant. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself in conversation with Beatrice. You know, Beatrice said, we've uncovered so many stories this past year. The Garden Book, the Thornbury Journals, Charlotte Ashford's library, Eleanor Ashworth's owl, and now this. All of them about people preserving knowledge, creating legacies, making differences in quiet ways. Mostly women, Clara observed, though James shows that men can embody these values too. It's not about gender really, but about a particular approach to life. Caring for others, preserving knowledge, creating spaces of welcome. It's about legacy through service rather than through fame. And you're part of that tradition now, Beatrice said warmly. The honeyed leaf is your legacy, not just the business but what it represents, what it offers to the community. Clara felt humbled by that. She didn't think of herself as creating a legacy. She was just running a tea shop, serving customers, having conversations. But perhaps that was the point. Legacy wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic actions. Sometimes it was about daily consistency, sustained kindness, the patient work of creating and maintaining spaces where people felt valued. In the weeks following the gathering, Clara noticed something shifting. More people lingered at the honeyed leaf, not just for tea but for conversation. They asked her advice, shared their troubles, sought her perspective. She found herself playing a role similar to what James had played, listening, offering support, helping people think through their choices. It wasn't something she'd consciously decided to do. It had emerged naturally from the space she'd created and the story she'd uncovered. Understanding James's role in the community had helped her see what was possible in her own. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop looking troubled. Clara had seen her before, knew her name was Emily, knew she worked at the bank in the next town, but they'd never had more than brief, polite exchanges. Today, Emily sat at a table, ordered tea, and seemed unable to leave. Clara brought the tea, and sensing something was needed, sat down. Is everything all right? She asked gently. Emily looked up, tears in her eyes. I don't know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't dump my problems on you. Sometimes it helps to talk, Clara said, and I'm happy to listen. Emily poured out her story. She was unhappy in her job, felt trapped in a career path she'd never really chosen. She wanted to retrain as a teacher but was afraid. Afraid of the financial risk, afraid of what people would think, afraid she was too old to start over. Clara listened, asked gentle questions, didn't offer solutions, but helped Emily articulate what she really wanted. After an hour, Emily left looking lighter, more hopeful. Thank you, she said. I feel like I can think clearly now, like maybe it's possible. Clara smiled. It's always possible to choose your own path. It takes courage, but it's possible. After Emily left, Clara stood at the window looking out at the village. She thought about Dorothy Fletcher, making the brave choice to join the WWII despite her family's disapproval. About James Winters, creating a space where that courage could be found. About all the small moments of support and kindness that had rippled through this building over decades. She was part of that now, part of a chain of care stretching back through time. It was a profound realization. As summer deepened into early autumn, Clara continued to learn from James's example. She kept the Willow Tea Room memorial updated, adding new items as they were discovered. She served the Willow blend regularly, telling customers about its history and what it represented, and she consciously tried to create the same atmosphere of welcome and acceptance that James had fostered. One September evening, as Clara was closing up, she noticed something tucked under the door. A small envelope, addressed simply, to Clara. She opened it to find a handwritten note. Dear Clara, I wanted to thank you. A few months ago, I came into your shop feeling lost and afraid. You listened to me, helped me see that I had choices. I've since left my unhappy job and started training to be a teacher. It was the best decision I've ever made, but I couldn't have done it without your kindness and support. You helped me find courage, just as James Winters once helped Dorothy Fletcher. Thank you for continuing his legacy. With gratitude, Emily." Clara held the note, tears streaming down her face. This was what James had felt when Dorothy thanked him. This profound sense of having mattered in someone else's life, of having helped, even in a small way. She carefully preserved Emily's note, adding it to her own private collection of meaningful moments. She didn't need public recognition. But knowing she'd made a difference, that was everything. That evening, she sat in her flat above the shop, drinking a cup of the Willow blend and thinking about legacy. About how the kindness James had shown Dorothy had inspired Dorothy to live courageously, which had inspired other women, which had rippled forward through generations. And now Clara was part of that ripple, offering the same support to Emily, who would go on to teach children, who would grow up to help others in turn. It was an endless chain of care and courage, each person supporting the next, the effect spreading outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Marmalade jumped into her lap, purring his contentment. Clara stroked his soft fur and looked around her cosy flat. This building had been home to the Willow Tea Room, where James Winters had created refuge during wartime. And now it was home to the Honeyed Leaf, where Clara continued that work in her own way. Different times, different challenges, but the same essential purpose. Creating space for people to be themselves, to find support, to discover courage. That was worth doing. That was a life well lived. The autumn evening settled gently over Willowbrook. Lights came on in windows throughout the village. People were having their dinners, settling in for the night, living their quiet lives. And throughout the village, in ways both seen and unseen, people were helping each other. Small acts of kindness, moments of support, spaces of welcome. All of it mattered. All of it created the fabric of community that held them together. Clara finished her tea and prepared for bed, feeling deeply content. Tomorrow she would open the Honeyed Leaf again. There would be tea to brew, customers to serve, conversations to encourage. Perhaps someone would need a listening ear or a supportive word. Perhaps she'd have the chance to help someone find their own courage. And in doing so, she would honour James Winters and Dorothy Fletcher, and all the others who'd understood that legacy was built through daily acts of care. That meaning was found in service to others. That the most profound changes often began with simple kindness. The undelivered letter had been found after 80 years. Its message of gratitude had finally been received, not by James, but by everyone who'd learned his story. And in learning it, they'd been inspired to continue what he'd started. That was legacy. Not fame or recognition, but influence that rippled forward through time. Not monuments or memorials, though those had their place, but changed lives and inspired choices. Not grand gestures, but daily consistency in creating spaces where people could become their best selves. Clara drifted towards sleep, grateful for the mystery that had led her to understand all this. Grateful for the Willow Tea Room and its legacy. Grateful for the chance to continue that legacy in her own way. And grateful for Willowbrook itself, this village that held its stories close, remembered its people, and valued kindness above all. In the morning, the village would wake to a new day. The church bells would ring, people would go about their business, and the Honeyed Leaf would open its doors, offering tea and comfort, conversation and connection, continuing the work that James Winters had begun so many years ago. The work of creating refuge in a sometimes difficult world. The work of listening and supporting. The work of helping people find courage to choose their own paths. Small work, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things. But meaningful work, essential work, work that mattered. And somewhere in the universe of memory and spirit, perhaps James Winters knew that his legacy lived on, that his kindness had not been forgotten, that the space he'd created continued to serve its purpose, that Dorothy's gratitude, though arriving 80 years late, had finally been received and honoured. Perhaps he knew, and perhaps he was pleased. But even if he didn't know, even if consciousness ended with death, and there was no afterlife to observe these things, it didn't matter. Because the legacy existed regardless. The influence remained real. the ripples continued spreading outward. That was the beautiful thing about acts of kindness and spaces of welcome. They didn't depend on recognition or reward. They had their own inherent value. They changed the world simply by existing, by being offered, by touching lives in the moment they occurred. Clara slept peacefully, dreaming of tea rooms and letters, of courage and kindness, of legacies built one conversation at a time. And in the darkness outside, the village of Willowbrook slept as well. Safe, peaceful, held together by countless acts of care, past and present, building toward a future where kindness would continue to matter, where people would continue to support each other, to create spaces of welcome, to help each other find courage, where the work James Winters had started would never truly end, but would be taken up by each new generation in their own way. That was the real immortality. Not living forever yourself, but creating something that would. Not your name being remembered, though that was nice, but your values being embodied. Not monuments to yourself, but influence that shaped how others lived. That was what James had achieved. That was what Dorothy had achieved. That was what Clara was achieving, one cup of tea at a time. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered. The night deepened over Willowbrook. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The stream that ran through the village murmured its eternal song. And in the honeyed leaf, on a shelf with other treasured items, Dorothy Fletcher's letter rested in its protective sleeve. A message of gratitude sent 80 years ago, finally received. A thank you that had waited patiently for its moment. A reminder that kindness matters, that small acts of support ripple forward through time, that creating spaces of welcome is profound work. The letter had found its home. The story had been told. The legacy was being honoured and continued. All was well in Willowbrook. All was as it should be. And tomorrow, the honeyed leaf would open again, ready to offer tea and comfort, ready to continue the work of creating refuge, ready to be part of the endless chain of care that connected past, present and future, ready to matter in small but meaningful ways, in the daily life of the village, just as James Winters had mattered, just as Dorothy Fletcher had mattered, just as Clara Whitmore mattered now. The work continued, the legacy lived on, and in the morning there would be tea. The end.